I went to Cedar Points opening weekend this year. I had one day at the coaster capital of the world, and this is how I spent it. Back in the end of April, I made the super spontaneous decision to go to Cedar Point opening weekend, with the goal of the entire trip being getting on Top Thrill 2. Almost $300 later, 16-hour train rides to and from, I can say that I had a very successful mission. Speaking of vlogs, if you want to see a different aspect of this trip in a much more in-depth video on just Top Thrill 2, well, then I think I have just the video for you. Anyway, I'm just making this video because I know some people absolutely hate watching vlogs and love this style of video essay, and then others hate the video essays but love the vlogs. Listen, I'm just trying to appeal to the masses here, and this trip did cost me a pretty penny, so I need to make this money back somehow. Okay, so this entire trip starts off on Saturday afternoon when I hopped on a train taking me from Harrisburg all the way to Toledo. I made one big stop in Pittsburgh to wait for my sleeper train, where I would then wake up in Toledo at around 5 a.m. Now, the original goal was to get to Pittsburgh for my layover, and my first thought was to close out Kennywood. I mean, obviously. But it was still way too early in the season for them to be open that late on a Saturday in May, and I missed the park by about 36 minutes. I did end up passing it though, so I still got to see it. Anyway, I had a good train ride, and I got little to no sleep, and we actually arrived in Toledo a little bit early. Now, for all you train nerds out there, you might be asking yourself, well, Michael, why didn't you just get off at the train station in Sandusky and be like a 15-minute walk from Cedar Point? Well, to that one random viewer, I was getting to that. First off, I did pass through Sandusky, but it was at like 3:50 in the morning. What on God's green earth would I have done from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. to when Cedar Point actually opens? Nothing. The answer is nothing. Now, I had a well thought out plan, and it honestly worked out way too well. The reason why I picked the train station in Toledo was because my good friend Hessler goes to college there. He picked me up from the train station, and we chilled in his dorm until we had to drive to Cedar Point. And it also worked out at the end of the day too, because I didn't have to be back at the train station till almost midnight, which is great because it meant I could close out Cedar Point and get last rides without being stressed out for missing my train back. Alright, so we roll up to Cedar Point and we get there pretty early. We park in the hotel parking lot because the pass holder lot was closed for some reason, and we kind of just hung out for the morning and took it pretty easy. We ended up walking around for a little bit, and I made my way to the main entrance to get my compensation tickets at guest services, and then it was time to make our main game plan to how we were going to start the day off. We decided to hit the small entrance near Windseeker over the Magnum entrance with about 20 to 25 minutes left in early entry. We bolted for Top Thrill 2, and it was actually really cool to walk up to this plaza the way it was intended and engineered, with the big whole grand entrance to this area and the grand reveal of the coaster. I feel like if we used Magnum's entrance, it just wouldn't have looked nearly as cool or had that much of an effect. Alright, so we roll up to the entrance plaza for Top Thrill 2, and well, here was our first reaction.
It's gonna be worse.
It might be big. It's beautiful, but it might not be good. That thing is flying. It's ginormous. That's so intimidating. It's so weird. Last time I was here, there was 9-foot concrete walls all around this coaster. Oh my goodness. I don't know, I say camera does not do this thing justice. Look how big that thing is.
So overall, I went into this experience not expecting too much out of Top Thrill 2, and it's pretty obvious by now that I'm not the biggest swing launch guy. So I went into this experience being extremely skeptical to actually really liking this coaster. Now, I know you guys want to hear all about Top Thrill 2 and what I have to think, but there is a very, very in-depth review coming out very soon. And we have a lot more to talk about today, so you're just going to have to wait for that video to hear my thoughts on Top Thrill 2. So after we got on our first ride on the all-new dragster, we headed over to Magnum because it had absolutely no line whatsoever. I mean, hey, I'll take it. Like, they were legit sending empty rows, so we picked up 2 rides on Magnum pretty easily.
I don't know, 2 rides on Magnum. I gotta say, whatever this is this year, 15 times better than it was last year. I cannot lie. Magnum is...
bad rides last year.
I don't... See, they weren't bad rides. It's just, it's running better. Like, I think Magnum was good last year. I'm not gonna lie. It's smooth, except for the places it has its major kinks. And that turnaround it's a love-hate relationship for me, I think. Very good, though. Very good.
I enjoyed all my rides I got on it, and it definitely didn't disappoint. And this all-new automated braking system with the trims ended up giving insanely consistent rides. And it was running pretty fast, too. Now, this is me saying that the ride is really, really good and still continues to blow me away every single ride, but that is by no means me saying I'm a part of this Magnum cult yet. I still don't really get where you guys are coming from, But after these rides, I think I'm starting to understand it maybe a tiny bit more. Maybe one day I'll get that ride that'll make me a true believer. But as for today and this ride, it just wasn't it. So we start walking around again. Currently, Top Thrill 2's broke down, Maverick's broken down, Steve's on one train, and we have a buddy that we're trying to meet up with soon, and he's on his way to the park. So we head up towards the front of the park and get rides on Gatekeeper. Now, we only ended up waiting like 10 minutes for this, and we got back left. And this is what I thought of Gatekeeper after my rides in 2023.
So Gatekeeper, it's good for a lineup like this park. It falls really, really flat, and that's understandable. It is extremely well-rounded, but doesn't excel in all of the things that it accomplishes.
Needless to say, last year I found this ride slightly underwhelming and just a tad bit overrated. Like how I said in the vlog back then.
There's like super weak floater, there's very slight whip, there's good near misses, and all of that put together makes a good, well-rounded ride. But if it excelled in all of those areas alone, while still being the same ride, that would be a crazy wing coaster.
This year, well, at least today, Gatekeeper was a complete 180. This thing was flying, and I mean flying through the layout. They also had one of the most impressive crews of the day sending out trains when the train on the course was in the turnaround passing back through the keyholes. So if any of you guys are watching this that are on Gatekeeper's crew, you guys are killing it, and I know that you guys continued to kill it throughout the rest of the season too. So fantastic job, you guys. Okay, back to the ride experience. I found this ride to be pretty incredible. I mean, this thing was moving. It had crazy, and I mean crazy positives in all of the inversions, good whip in the near miss, and the slightest amount of airtime on the camelback, and the mid-course was off. I've never felt forces before coming off that mid-course or in that helix, but they were definitely there for this ride. Now, that's not me saying that these forces were totally out of control, but subjectively for how this coaster usually runs, or I guess I should say compared to my rides I got in 2023, this was definitely a standout, faster and better ride experience than what I had previously. We get off Gatekeeper, and by the time we are done, our buddy is in the parking lot waiting for us, so we meet up with Noah, and we do another little check to see what's going on in the park. What's great about today is that it's the park's opening weekend, and it is the grand reopening of the world's second tallest roller coaster. With an event this big, every single big coaster creator was in the park, and with eyes and ears everywhere, it was super easy to just go on Instagram and figure out what was going on at any location within the park. With that, it was really easy to see that Maverick was down. Same with Magnum. Top Thrill 2 had an almost 2-hour line, and Steve was still on one train and was growing a huge line. It's also how I found out that Millie only had like a 30-minute wait, and apparently it was running crazy good today. So that's how we made our decision to stay away from the right side and the back of the park and head over to Millie. So we head over to Millie, and the line is slightly longer than what everyone was letting on, but we decided that it was a good time commitment because there was literally nothing else of worth left in the park to ride. Everything else was down or had too much of a line to justify waiting in. Now, Millennium Force is a roller coaster that honestly really disappointed me last year. I mean, I went into this coaster having some crazy expectations, and the coaster ended up being a flop on pretty much every level. The crew is terrible, the forces weren't there, and overall, this ride is just incredibly mediocre, especially for how much hype, praise, and love this thing gets with inside the community. So, I come back this year, giving it a second chance, and I end up getting a back row ride. Sheesh. Yeah, no, this thing definitely stepped it up a little bit. I mean, I was graying out left and right, getting airtime every place that I would want it. I mean, this thing gave me super sustained, weak floater. Legit felt like an old school B&M Camelback. This thing was really strong floater, and for this, well, it was a sustained pop of ejector. All the turns were also dosed with decent positives too, but these things, oh my lord, oh my god, and in the back row, just so intense, and getting whipped out of them was wicked. The crew, still absolutely terrible. It is pitiful how horrendously bad they are. But overall, this ride portrayed this coaster much better than the disappointment I thought it was last year. Still, I don't think it really deserves anywhere near the cult following it has. Or, I guess I should say I just still haven't gotten that ride yet. After Millie, we finally made our way to the back of the park. We went back to that crazy top 2 and we rode Maverick. Now let me just say, this was insane. This was by far one of the craziest rides I've ever gone on any coaster. I don't think that the trims after the launch were doing anything. We all agreed that this was the best Maverick ride that any of us have ever gotten. The whip in the stangle dives and that pop of airtime before the brakes was absolutely unreal. And of course, the beginning was fantastic like usual. This coaster still just blows me away over and over again. Everything from that drop to the switchbacks, even the inversions were offering some crazy whip today. It was an absolutely unreal ride on this coaster. From one banger to another, we get off Maverick and we obviously had to go check out Steve. Yeah, no, Steve was having quite the bad day. It's no surprise that RMC parts were all, and I mean all parts were on back order this year. Wildcat suffered from it. Jersey Devil suffered from it and is still suffering from it. Well, Steve opened up with one train. Yeah, that's right. Steel Vengence on one train for opening weekend. Later in the day, they put a second train on, and that's when we decided to ride it. But nonetheless, it was still suffering from that RMC shortage. We waited a hot minute for Steve, and this was by far the worst part of the day. The queue line on this coaster is miserable, and it was a pretty hot day out too. It definitely was getting up there by this point midday. They were using the extended part of Steve's queue, which is completely uncovered, and for whatever reason, they also refused to turn on any of the fans. I don't know, some people were complaining and they just did absolutely nothing about it. I'll proceed to go on this rant, but this crew is another one of those crews where I think they get too much credit. Now, granted, I'll give them credit where credit is due, but they are a really obnoxious crew. They really act like they're all that, when in reality, they have riders that are getting onto their trains with absolutely no loose articles, and they have literally one of the easiest intervals to hit. Like, come on, you guys really aren't all that. There are just certain crews that I think bring this negative persona, Steve being one of them. Sometimes I think the crew is pretty rude and is just being rude for the sake of looking big and bad and super intimidating. I don't know, I feel like I could make an entire video on all my issues with Steve and its crew and its queue line, and it's a video for another day. Now I got a back row ride, and something that me and my buddies like to do on RMCs. It's pretty goofy, but just hear me out. There's this coaster over in France called Tonnerre to Zeus, and essentially the trains run backwards on the track, giving you a backwards ride experience. What we do is Tonnerre to whatever coaster we're on. Tonnerre to Timbers, Tonnerre to Cat, and now we do Tonnerre to Steve. And while I definitely remember this ride, it was a little hard to pay attention to because the entire time Noah and I are just trying our absolute hardest not to do this with our heads. Now what I will say though, this ride was decently impressive for it being opening weekend, but compared to my rides last year, I don't know, it didn't really compare. Now don't get me wrong, this ride was great, but the 3 rides that I got on it in 2023 were just that much better. I don't know if it was just the magic of the first time riding it back then, or maybe this time I was just too distracted. Who knows? If my rides on Steve last year were this almost perfect, let's say like 96%, then the ride that I got today was maybe like an 89%, like so close to being that A+. Now I can't lie, it did disappoint me a little bit, and I did wish that the line wasn't so long so I could give it another shot and ride it and just ride it normally and pay attention to all the forces. But this ride definitely didn't live up to all that I remember Steve being, which surprisingly, this is the first coaster today that I can say that about. Everything else I got rides on today was just as good to pretty much being better than how I remembered it. So, from the beginning, my mindset was the only goal of the day was to ride Top Thrill 2, and the rest of the day was just an added bonus. Well, we accomplished that goal within the first 45 minutes of the park being open, and now you can see just how much more we were able to get done up until this point today, too. At this point, Hessler and I are satisfied with our day, and we now start thinking about re-rides. Well, Noah is with us now, and his number 1 of all time is Magnum. So we finally give in and we don't make him wait any longer, and we go back to ride Magnum. The line is still only in the station, and depending what row you want, it's definitely a station wait. We obviously had to either go with the back row or row 3, so we ended up waiting a few extra trains. We were going to go for more rides, but within just that one cycle, we pull back into the station and see that over the past few minutes, the line kind of grew a lot. Not even worth getting re-rides, especially when we'd much rather wait for re-rides on Top Thrill 2. Which, speaking of, we head back over there next. Now, within waiting for this one ride, we invested like an hour and a half. It ended up breaking down like 3 or 4 times, and they almost even took a train off. We finally get back on, and this time I ride in the middle / near the front of the train. I think it was around row 4-ish. This ride is such a good... Actually, that's not even what this video is about. You guys are just still going to have to wait for that review to come out to hear all about this ride. So after that time investment, we ended up getting our ride. It's one of those moments where you realize how much time you just spent waiting and you think it was worth it. It was just odd now finally not waiting anymore. We had a hard time figuring out what to do next. We thought that maybe the front of the park wouldn't be so crowded because it's nearing the end of that prime of the peak day. So we head over to the front of the park and we get on Raptor. Now, speaking of another coaster that I don't remember being nearly as good as it was last year, yes, sadly, Raptor fell victim to this, and my ride on it this year was not nearly as good as I remember it being last year. I don't know why it wasn't as good, but overall, I still love this ride. I absolutely love this coaster, and I'm such a sucker for those old school inverts. And for this one, I think it's somehow becoming a little bit overshadowed and maybe even somewhat underrated. From the front of the park, we head right back to the back of the park to get re-rides on Maverick. And I mean, after just how good that first ride was, it was a must to try and get back on Maverick. And this time with a little bit more pep in our step because we were on a mission. We were going to get a ride on Maverick, and then we're going to try and get to Top Thrill 2 as fast as possible for last rides of the night. Anyway, back to Maverick. This ride, oh my. After this ride, how do I put this? I think that this year Maverick is miles, and I mean miles ahead of Steve. As in, my rides on Maverick were better and just blew me away way more than my ride on Steve. But my ride on Maverick this year was not better than my ride on Steve last year. Still though, I think that this year, for 2024 in particular, and specifically, not overall, just for this year, I would put Maverick well above Steve. I mean, it was just perfect, everything about it. This ride is running crazy. I can't even put words to it. Just how good it was. This is a ride that I crave, and this ride in particular, along with my first rides from today, is just one of those experiences that I still think about constantly. We got a ride on Maverick, which was like fantastic. I think I might like it more than Steve, honestly, this year.
No.
Last year Steve rides.
No.
Last year Steve rides were so much better than whatever Steve was doing this year. But
Stop it.
We got 2 rides on Maverick overall then.
Being honest.
The 2 rides on Maverick were some of the best experiences I've had on a coaster. Reminded me of reminded me of I-305
I've ever had. Yeah, easily best 100.
Dude, this Maverick was crazy.
They were top 5.
We end up making it just in time for the queue line to close for Top Thrill 2, and we get within like the last 5 trains or so sent for the night. By the time we get all of our stuff out of the lockers, they're already sending empty trains, which is pretty crazy to think about, honestly. And it's even crazier to think about the fact that we actually accomplished getting a night ride on Top Thrill 2. And just like that, our day trip to the roller coaster capital of the world was over. Hessler drove me back to the train station, and just like that, I was on my way home. On Saturday afternoon, I got on a train to leave, and by Monday midday, I was already back. I did this entire trip in just about 2 days. I was in and out, got to the point, got on Top Thrill 2, and got out. The mission was successful, and on top of all that, we also had a really great day too. So many good rides on some world-class coasters, most of which ended up being better than what I remembered. A lot of great memories were made, and now I can also say that I've been on Top Thrill 2. I am so glad and grateful that I was able to have this experience and also be able to go on such a crazy and spontaneous trip like this. Now it's made me make this video about my crazy day and my experiences, so thank you to all of you who have found interest in me talking about my crazy day, or I guess I should say my crazy weekend. I had so many more crazy adventures like this over the summer. This one just happened to be the first, so if you want to see what all those are about and you enjoyed this video or just my style of content, maybe, possibly, pretty please you could, maybe hit that subscribe button. But also, don't forget to talk to me in the comments, too. And speaking of comments, today's shout-out goes to Bay Beach Enthusiast. Yep, I finally remembered the good old YouTube password, and I finally decided to upload again. Don't worry, I think this return should be pretty permanent, or at least I hope it is. Who knows? Anyway, if you want to shout out in the next Coaster Talk video, all you gotta do is just leave a comment down below. Just another reason for you to go down there and spark up a conversation with me. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys very, very soon in that Top Thrill 2 review. See ya.